Hello everyone, and welcome back to Talk Helen. I'm Helen, and I'm so happy you're here today. Now before we begin, let me welcome today's guest. Joining me today is Alex. Alex, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Helen. Great to be here. And honestly, today's topic sounds like something I really need.
I think a lot of people need it. Because today we're talking about something that happens to almost every English learner. Actually, it happens to native speakers too. You're having a conversation. Everything is going fine. You're talking. The other person is talking. And then suddenly, silence. Awkward silence. Nobody knows what to say next. The conversation dies.
Oh no. I've been there so many times.
Most people have. And here's what's interesting. Many English learners think the problem is vocabulary. They think, if I knew more words, I could keep the conversation going. But honestly, that's usually not the problem.
Really?
Really. Because keeping a conversation alive isn't about knowing more words. It's about knowing what to do next. It's about understanding how conversations actually work. Let me ask you something. Imagine someone asks, "How was your weekend?" What would you say?
Maybe. It was good.
And then what happens?
Probably silence.
Exactly. Because it was good gives the other person almost nothing to work with. The conversation hits a wall. Now imagine this answer. It was good. I went hiking with some friends. Suddenly, things change. Now the other person can ask, where did you go? Was it fun? Do you hike often? The conversation has somewhere to go. That's the first secret. Never stop at the shortest possible answer. Give people something they can use.
So the goal isn't just answering. The goal is helping the conversation continue.
Exactly. And once you understand that, everything becomes easier. Now let me tell you something that native speakers do naturally. When somebody says something interesting, they react. They don't just wait for their turn to speak, they react. Imagine somebody says, "I just got back from Italy." A learner might say, "Oh, and that's it?" A native speaker might say, "Really? How was it?" That's awesome. What was your favorite part? Notice the difference?
Yeah. One response ends the conversation. The other keeps it moving.
Exactly. And that's one of the biggest secrets of great conversation. Curiosity. People who are good at conversations are usually curious. They want to know more. They ask questions. They explore topics. They don't just answer, they engage. Now, let's imagine a conversation. Somebody says, "I started learning guitar last month." You could say, "Oh," or you could say, "That's cool. What made you start?" Which version keeps the conversation alive?
Definitely the second one.
Exactly, because questions create momentum, and momentum keeps conversations alive. Now here's another mistake many learners make. They think they need to say something impressive, something intelligent, something perfect. But that's not true. In fact, simple questions often work best. Imagine somebody says, "I watched a great movie last night." You don't need a brilliant response. You can simply ask, "What movie was it?" That's enough. Conversations aren't complicated. People often make them complicated, but they're not. They're built from small questions, small responses, small moments of curiosity.
I think a lot of learners put too much pressure on themselves.
Absolutely. They think, I need the perfect response. But the perfect response doesn't exist. The goal is connection, not perfection. Now let's talk about another technique, one of my favorites. The follow-up question. This is incredibly powerful. Imagine somebody says, I just started a new job. Instead of changing the subject, ask a follow-up question. What do you do? How's it going so far? Are you enjoying it? One statement can create 5 minutes of conversation if you know how to follow up.
That's actually true. Most conversations end because nobody follows up.
Exactly. People drop opportunities without realizing it. Now, here's something else that helps. Share a little bit about yourself. Let's imagine somebody says, I love traveling, instead of only asking questions. You can add something. For example, I love traveling too. Last year, I visited Spain. Now the conversation has 2 directions. You're learning about them, and they're learning about you. That's how real conversations grow. They're not interviews, they're exchanges. And that's a very important difference. Many learners accidentally turn conversations into interviews. Question, answer, question, answer, question, answer. That's not how natural conversations work. Natural conversations move back and forth, like a tennis match. One person speaks, the other responds, then shares something, then asks a question, then listens, then responds again. That's the rhythm. And once you understand that rhythm, conversations become much easier. Now, let me ask you something, Alex. Have you ever worried about running out of things to say?
All the time, especially when speaking English.
Most learners do. But here's a secret. You don't need endless topics. You just need to go deeper into the topic you're already discussing. For example, somebody says, I went to New York. Most learners immediately jump to a new subject, but a strong conversationalist stays there. What did you do there? How long were you there? What was your favorite part? Would you go back? One topic can create an entire conversation if you're willing to explore it. And that's where curiosity becomes your superpower. Curiosity creates questions. Questions create conversation. Conversation creates connection. And connection is the real goal. Now here's another useful trick. Use reactions. Native speakers use reactions constantly. For example, no way. Really? That's amazing. Seriously? Wow. That's interesting. These little reactions keep energy in the conversation. Imagine somebody says, I met my favorite actor last week. You respond, wow, seriously? Now the conversation feels alive. But if you respond with, okay, the energy disappears. That's why reactions matter. They're small, but powerful.
I never realized how often native speakers use reactions.
All the time. And once you start noticing them, you'll hear them everywhere. Now let's imagine another conversation. Friend, I just bought my first house. Response 1, nice. Response 2, that's amazing. How does it feel? Which one creates a better conversation?
Definitely the second one.
Exactly. Because emotion creates connection. And conversations are emotional. People don't just exchange information, they exchange feelings, experiences, stories. That's what makes conversations interesting. Now let's talk about something very important: listening. A lot of people think great conversationalists are great talkers, but often great conversationalists are great listeners, because when you listen carefully, you find things to ask about, things to explore, things to discuss. If you're only thinking about what you're going to say next, you miss those opportunities, and then conversations feel difficult.
That makes so much sense.
Think about the best conversations you've ever had. Chances are the other person listened. They paid attention. They responded to what you actually said. That's why the conversation felt good. Not because they used complicated vocabulary, but because they were engaged. And that's a skill anyone can develop. Now here's a challenge for everyone listening. The next time you're having a conversation in English, don't focus on saying something impressive. Focus on being curious. Focus on asking one more question. Focus on showing interest, because that's what keeps conversations alive. And honestly, that's what people remember. They don't remember your grammar. They don't remember your vocabulary. They remember how you made them feel. And people enjoy talking to someone who's genuinely interested in them.
I think that's one of the biggest lessons I've learned today.
And we're only getting started, because there are even more powerful techniques that make conversations flow naturally. Techniques that native speakers use every single day without even realizing it. And once you start using them, you'll never worry about awkward silence the same way again.
Now I'm really curious.
Good. Because that's exactly where we're going next. Now let me tell you about one of the biggest conversation killers. And honestly, almost everyone does it. Some people do it in English. Some people do it in their native language. And most of the time, they don't even realize they're doing it. The conversation killer is this: giving dead-end answers.
Dead-end answers?
Exactly. Answers that leave nowhere to go. Imagine somebody asks, "What do you do for fun?" And you answer, "Nothing." Conversation dead. Or maybe, "What kind of music do you like?" And you answer, "Everything." Conversation dead. Or, "How was your vacation?" "It was okay." Conversation dead. The problem isn't that these answers are wrong. The problem is that they don't help the conversation continue. Now let's improve them. What do you do for fun? I like hiking and photography. Now people have something to ask about. What kind of music do you like? I mostly listen to rock and jazz. Now the conversation has direction. How was your vacation? It was great. I spent a few days near the coast. Again, something to work with. That's one of the easiest ways to become a better conversationalist. Stop giving dead ends. Start giving conversation opportunities.
I can already think of situations where I've accidentally killed conversations.
Everyone has. Even native speakers. The difference is that good conversationalists notice it and adjust. Now, here's another powerful technique. The phrase, "That reminds me."
Oh, that's a good one.
It's amazing because it helps conversations flow naturally from one topic to another. Imagine somebody says, "I just got back from California." You respond, "That reminds me, I've always wanted to visit California." Now the conversation continues naturally. Or maybe, "I started learning guitar." "That reminds me, my cousin recently started learning piano." See what happened? The conversation evolved without feeling forced. That's how natural conversations often work. One topic connects to another, and then another, and then another. People don't follow scripts, they follow associations. One idea reminds them of another idea, and conversations grow organically. Now here's something interesting. Many learners worry about running out of topics, but native speakers rarely think that way. They simply explore whatever appears. Imagine somebody says, "I adopted a dog." That single statement can create dozens of questions. What kind of dog? How old is it? What's its name? How long have you had it? Was it difficult? Why did you choose that breed? One sentence. Dozens of possibilities. That's why curiosity is more important than vocabulary. Curiosity creates opportunities. Vocabulary simply helps you express them.
That's a really interesting way to look at it.
And it's true. I've met people with limited vocabulary who were amazing conversationalists. And I've met people with advanced vocabulary who struggled to maintain conversations. Because conversation isn't a vocabulary competition, it's a connection skill. Now, let's talk about another thing that helps conversations feel natural. Sharing small stories. Imagine somebody asks, "Have you ever been camping?" You could say, "Yes." Conversation almost over. Or you could say, "Yes." Actually, I went camping last summer and it rained the entire weekend. Now you've created a story. Stories attract attention. People naturally want more details. They naturally ask questions. That's how conversations become interesting. And the good news? Stories don't need to be dramatic. They don't need explosions. They don't need celebrities. They just need details, real-life details, small moments, funny experiences, unexpected situations. Those things create memorable conversations. Now let's imagine another situation. Someone says, "I hate public speaking." You could respond, "Me too," and "Stop," or "Me too." I remember giving a presentation once and completely forgetting what I wanted to say. Suddenly you've introduced a story, and stories keep conversations alive. Now here's another secret. Don't be afraid to admit things. People often think they need to be impressive, but vulnerability actually helps conversations. Imagine somebody says, "Do you cook often?" You could say, "Not really. I'm actually terrible at cooking." That's honest. And honesty creates connection. Now people might ask, "Really? What's the worst thing you've ever cooked?" And suddenly everyone's laughing. Conversations become easier when people stop trying to be perfect.
That's true. The most enjoyable conversations I've had were usually the most relaxed ones.
Exactly. Relaxed people create relaxed conversations. Now let's talk about silence. Because many learners are terrified of silence. The moment there's a pause, they panic. They think, "Oh no, the conversation is dying." But here's the truth. A few seconds of silence is normal, completely normal. Native speakers experience it too. Good conversationalists don't panic. They stay calm. Then they gently restart the conversation. For example, "By the way," one of the most useful conversation phrases ever. "By the way, have you seen that new movie?" Or, By the way, how's your new job going? Simple, natural, effective.
I use by the way sometimes.
Use it more. It's a conversation lifesaver. Now, here's another great phrase. Speaking of that, imagine somebody says, I just bought a new car. A few minutes later, you can say, speaking of cars, have you ever thought about getting an electric one? That's a natural transition. And transitions are incredibly important because conversations are constantly changing direction. People move from topic to topic, and phrases like, speaking of that, by the way, that reminds me, help make those transitions smooth. Now let's discuss another mistake learners make, trying too hard to sound intelligent. Imagine somebody asks, what did you do this weekend? And instead of giving a simple answer, you spend 2 minutes constructing the perfect sentence. The conversation loses energy. Real conversations move, they're dynamic, they're imperfect, and that's okay. You don't need perfect English to have great conversations. You need engagement. You need curiosity. You need willingness. That's far more important. Now imagine somebody asks, what have you been watching lately? You don't need a perfect answer. You can simply say, mostly documentaries. What about you? Notice what happened. You answered. Then redirected the conversation. That's another great technique. Answer, then ask. Answer, then ask. Not every time, but often. Because conversations are shared experiences, not solo performances.
That sounds much easier than trying to carry the entire conversation yourself.
Exactly. And that's another important lesson. You are not responsible for 100% of the conversation. The other person participates too. Good conversations are partnerships, not performances. Now, before we finish today's conversation, I want everyone listening to remember a few things. If you want to keep conversations going, be curious, ask follow-up questions, share small details, tell short stories, use reactions, listen carefully. Don't fear silence. Use transitions like, by the way, speaking of that, that reminds me. And most importantly, stop focusing on perfect English. Focus on real communication. Because people don't remember perfect grammar. They remember enjoyable conversations. They remember feeling heard. They remember feeling understood. And that's what great conversationalists create. Not perfect sentences, great experiences.
Honestly, this topic changed the way I think about conversations. I always assumed the solution was learning more vocabulary, but now I realize it's really about connection.
Exactly. Vocabulary helps. Grammar helps. But connection is what keeps conversations alive. And the wonderful thing is that anyone can learn it. You don't need to be extroverted. You don't need a huge vocabulary. You don't need perfect pronunciation. You just need genuine curiosity and a willingness to engage. And that's something everyone can practice. Alex, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you, Helen. This was incredibly helpful. And honestly, I feel much less nervous about conversations now.
That's exactly what I hoped for. And thank you to everyone listening. The next time you're talking to someone in English, don't worry about saying the perfect thing. Focus on being curious. Focus on keeping the conversation moving. Focus on connecting. Because that's what real communication is all about. And I'll see you in the next episode of Talk Helen. Take care, everyone.